So if everybody could please join me in welcoming to the stage, we have Chris Riotta, who will be moderating this panel from Newsweek, Ken Kerrigan from Shandwick, Lindsay Kaplan from Casper, and Marc Liepis from VICELAND. I hope you guys are all ready for a really great panel discussion. Thanks, and please welcome our panel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Chris Riotta. I'm a journalist. I work at Newsweek, and I currently cover the Trump family. So I think I know why I was brought here. Thank you. And you know, looking around, it's really interesting. Many people are saying that this is actually the largest crowd size at any PRSA gathering in the history of the PRSA. So. You know, I actually have no idea whether that's true or not, but we can just call
Fake
it an
news.
alternative fact. Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, I think alternative facts it's a pretty broad term, right? And I think it encompasses a lot of what we've been seeing in 2017 as communicators and PR professionals. We notice that fake news and misinformation is somewhat at an all-time high, and yet at the same time, this has been something that we've been dealing with as communicators for centuries. You know, Winston Churchill actually said, a lie gets halfway around the world in the amount of time it takes the truth to get its pants on. So I think that's what we're doing right now as communicators. We're putting on our pants and trying to figure out how to navigate this system. It's something that I've been doing with my job quite a bit. I got a call from the press secretary of the White House 2 weeks ago, and I was told that I was fake news. So it's not just a talking point on TV. They actually.
I like that it's not just the news that is fake; is you yourself are fake.
Yes, correct.
News.
I myself, Chris Riotta, is.
You've looked in the mirror and you have assessed yourself.
Do you get a
that
card?
You do not
Do
exist.
you get like a ID
Yeah,
card or
I've
T-shirt?
added it to my business card.
I think you
Fake
should. I like
news
it.
professional.
Like a LinkedIn expertise. Fake
Exactly.
news.
Yeah, it's a badge
I
of
endorsed
honor.
you for fake news on LinkedIn.
So, but you know, I'd love everyone else to just introduce yourself and describe what you do, and also if you could just add sort of what is the closest that you've gotten to alternative facts and fake news in your industry. So take it away.
All right, I'll go first. I'm Ken Kerrigan, and I'm an executive vice president at Shandwick, and I lead our corporate group in New York City, and also adjunct faculty at New York University. And many of my students are out there taking my picture right now, actually. And the closest I've come to alternative facts, I've been thinking about that. And to your point, that this is not new. We all think that fake news arrived with Trump, and the phrase alternative facts arrived with Sean Spicer. And it's not true. And my first interaction with it would have been in the mid-90s, way before Facebook or any of these alternative news sites. When chat rooms were the social platform of the day, and aggressive investors who wanted to short a stock would go and plant gossip and rumors about a transaction that simply weren't true, and that would tie our hands as financial PR people on when do you respond to something that's a lie on a Yahoo chat room. So it does, in finance, it goes back to the 90s, and it goes back to Churchill and Goebbels in World War II. And we'll talk more about that.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Kaplan. I am the Vice President of Communications and Brand Engagement at Casper. You wouldn't probably think about mattresses when you hear the phrase fake news, but I think it's applicable to all brands now because there are lies on the internet. You don't really know what is the truth anymore. I think that traditional advertising is held to a very different standard now than the wild, wild west of the internet. And I think we've all agreed that there is no Rosetta Stone of truth on the web anymore, unless you count Snopes.com, which is, go Snopes, which has also been debated as whether it is fake or not. And so, yeah, no matter whether you're, reading the news or reading reviews for products on Amazon, it's really hard to discern what is actually truthful out there.
Hey, I'm Marc Liepis. I'm the Vice President of Communications for VICELAND, the cable channel from Vice Media. I actually make fake news for a living. I used to call it spin. It seems so quaint now. But no, actually, in all seriousness, prior to this job, I was at Saturday Night Live and Conan O'Brien some years back at NBC. So fake news was my stock in trade before we called it that. So yeah, that's it's. I think the whole notion. I think the idea of like gossip and lies is as old as communication, but I think denial of fact is where fake news now lives. I think it's full tilt. I'm looking at 1 + 1. I have 2 apples now, and I'm not going to agree that this is 2 apples. This is still 1 apple, no matter how many ways you tell it to me. It's 1 apple, and it is mind-boggling. So the betting part, the connection to me with this is I would never get out of bed at this point with the amount of nonsense. So that's my personal connection to that.
I think what's really interesting, actually, about your work and your experience with alternative facts and fake news is that you worked on SNL during the previous 2 elections. Is that right? 2000 and 2008 it would be, actually, yep. Right?
Yeah.
So for Barack Obama's and for George W. Bush, and I think one incredible point where fake news really hit a high during the election between John McCain and Barack Obama was when Sarah Palin stepped in, and she said the infamous quote, "I can see Russia from my house." From Alaska, and that became sort of SNL's one of their biggest jokes during the election season. Can you just describe a little bit about what it was like dealing with that era before this one?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting now. It seems like ancient times because back then, and I say to even start a sentence with "back then" is crazy, but there was no social media. I mean, literally, it wasn't a thing. You would get on some fan website that like there was a board that one dude ran and like 5 people posted on just to see what they thought, and you'd try to extrapolate that out for the millions of people that were watching it. That was the best you could do in terms of like real time, feedback. Whereas now I keep in touch with my friends over there, and it's just, they're pulling their hair out throughout the show, watching it like a little ticker going up and down because every joke is getting reviewed as it happens, which is insanity. I think where you could start to see the seeds of it, though, is oddly enough, the Palin thing, if I remember correctly, and I could be completely wrong, so I will preface this, I can see Russia from my house. She never actually said that. It was a joke that just stuck to her like glue because of the performance and the writing between Tina Fey and Seth Meyers' writing. But like, I'd have to go back and look, but if I remember correctly, I think she implied as much, but never actually said the sentence, which just, again, goes to show you that it doesn't take much to sort of create this sort of impossibly sticky, non-factual item, And, working in comedy during a presidential election is weird business because suddenly you're held to a responsibility level that you have none of. I mean, we would get called on equal time. We would get called on bias. We would get called on all this stuff by, already biased news sources like Michelle Malkin calling us, servants of the left, even though I knew full well that the guy who wrote the Gore-Bush debates was a very staunch Republican and proud of it. And so it's just, you get into this twilight area of just full-blown craziness that you just can't listen to any of it and just you rely on the material exclusively because anything else is not, it doesn't help anything, So that's it. You have to just kind of be very stalwart and just let the material speak for itself, and that's it. You can't take it any further.
And so another thing that I thought was really interesting during a conversation that we had prior to this panel was Lindsay's work with Casper actually does revolve a lot around alternative facts and misinformation, and there's sort of this underlying battle going on online where reviews can be purchased and then used to manipulate consumers. This can all really just be coming from other companies that have their own motives, other mattress companies. So it really does impact. It's not just TV writers and reporters, but could you explain sort of how this has impacted Casper and whether Casper is doing anything to sort of sort of battle this?
Sure. I think a high consideration purchase like a mattress, people want to do research, they want to educate themselves. Unfortunately, at this point, most of us feel as though the reviews on a website are pretty biased. I feel like that for most other categories that I'm looking at. And so the user turns to third-party recommendations, and they usually go straight into Google and maybe hit on the first or second highest ranking review that looks kind of unbiased. And if there's no disclosure about who is writing that, is there a kickback? Is there some sort of relationship that the consumer doesn't know about? They could be significantly biased to purchase a competitor just based on a review they read. And so when you look at an industry, and I think it's similar with anything that's high consideration, where the consumer does a lot of research. I went looking for a baby stroller, and I started looking through okay, which one has good reviews? And I got this cloud of, I don't trust anything. I don't know if this reviewer is getting a kickback. I don't know if there's an affiliate link. Do the affiliate links pay a modest amount of money to keep this great unbiased reviewer going? Is it something more nefarious than that? Who do I trust? And I found that I mostly trust Consumer Reports now. And the sad thing is, Consumer Reports is behind a paywall. So a lot of what we find to be the most reliable tellers of truth have to fund themselves some way. It's usually behind a paywall, and most of us don't want to pay to find content that we're only using every so often as we're looking to purchase something. So it's really interesting to see that the New York Times, most of their content now is behind a paywall. So are we suffering for poor quality because of the democratization of distributed content? It's really hard to say.
If I could pick up on that, I think, and this impacts great magazines like Newsweek too, that thankfully are making a comeback, but were going away not too long ago. And the positive spin would be the democratization of content. The more negative is the disintermediation of media. And I think that was a mindset, put forward by large PR agencies like my own, that we didn't need you anymore. That we could create.
Thanks a lot.
Exactly.
I still need you.
That we could create great content.
I'm on the fence.
We could create great content and put it online, and people would come and find out what they need to know because, well, they just trust us. And then the second shift that happened, that was a mindset. The other shift that happened is Google and Facebook, the two largest media companies in the world that don't behave or follow the rules like a media company. And they now suck up 97% of all ad revenue in America. So it's not just the
Facebook
paywall.
claims that it's not a media company.
Well, right.
And that's really
Right.
the irony, is that Facebook wants to be treated like a tech platform when it is, in fact, the world's biggest media platform
Correct.
in history.
And there's a great interview with Sheryl Sandberg and Axios that ran yesterday, I think, where Axios takes her to task for, are you a media company? But what that creates is, if trust content, if truth is behind the paywall, and we don't want to pay $99 a year to subscribe to Newsweek, and advertisers would rather put their revenue on Facebook and Google, well, then there's no revenue left to pay people like you who truly want to be journalists. And truth goes away because of disintermediation. And that's a huge problem, and nobody's talking about it. And I think PR agencies need to speak up very loudly and say that the truth matters and journalism matters. And that's a quiet topic right now, and it needs to be heard quite loudly.
And I think what else is pretty fascinating about this this paywall issue is that a lot of the news that becomes behind or goes behind a paywall, or a lot of the reviews that we see that go on Consumer Reports that go behind a paywall, not only is it's more expensive to get to, but it's often more difficult to get to. Whereas reviews that can all be purchased and written by bots or just being bought by another company to manipulate consumers, those are typically right on the exact site where you're purchasing your product from. And as someone who often buys a lot of hair product, as you can see, I'll be on Amazon and I'm looking at 1,000 different reviews from people, and they're saying, "Oh, this is great! It's the best hair product I've ever used." You go 2 paragraphs down for this glowing review, and then they say, "By the way, I got a discount when I purchased this in order to write a review." So it's even real people but they clearly have a bias considering they got a discount, and then I'm asking, how do I get that discount? So, I think that it becomes a question of when are companies like Facebook going to step in and say, we cannot allow this spread of misinformation to happen any longer. We have to be the same critical players as Newsweek, as CNN, as Washington Post. I'm wondering what you guys think about that.
Well, I think it's slowly starting to happen because they've gotten caught. Because they've gotten caught. I mean, let's call things what they are. I mean, with the Russia investigation and everything else that's been going on, they've had to answer for the fact that, they've had all this content showing up on their platform that was patently false, toxic, and from a foreign government. Again, if you actually wrote it down and read the sentence back to yourself, you'd shoot yourself because it's insane. It's all absolutely insane.
You need a nap.
You have no idea. But I think that I think that that's the beginning of it. But again, when you are that big a company with that much bandwidth and that much, power, like they can go as slowly as they choose. They can create their own sort of way through it that's not going to have the same rigor that a traditional editor has, like a straight up old school editor. And I think that that's the thing that I've noticed just in general, and this is across the board, not just in terms of the notion of fake news and all this. I feel like this whole notion of the digital revolution is all about disruption, but there is still inherent value in old school in that you need editors, you need gatekeepers. Like just because anybody can make a movie with their phone doesn't mean everybody should. I think we all know this. I mean,
I don't even know if it's the gatekeeping so much as it's the journalism, and
sure.
it's people who actually report and investigate and when it comes to mattresses, try the mattress and sleep on it before they write a review about it. And there are reporters who have gone to great lengths to try and sleep on and use a Casper mattress. Right. Similarly, the less journalists we have, the more exaggerated claims there are out in the world that aren't substantiated, that are not fact-based. And it hurts everything from our political conversation to the way in which we are led down the path to buying from certain brands.
Yeah, it's a question of standards. I mean, ultimately, if there are no standards, then you can't have truth. You can't. There's no quality control on the information, or fact checking. Simple, again, old school fact checking. The simple, but because you can sort of just say anything, hit send, and nobody questions it. I mean, and if you have even a remotely
I think people question
real
it.
sounding background,
Yeah.
you sort of all of a sudden have this kind of, it's like a fake credibility almost.
Yeah, I do think there is a lot of confirmation bias on the internet. So people question what they don't want to hear.
Right.
And if it falls
Absolutely.
into the wheelhouse of what they're interested in, they will share it because it continues to, further their own interests.
I think if you want to find the truth, say, a lot of what we just heard, the commonalities, you need to follow the money. You need to see who's getting the discount to post that review on Amazon, and is that discount creating a bias? But also, the two cornerstones of journalism are integrity and courage when it comes to investigative journalism. Integrity is in the heart and in the soul. That's why they chose the job. And so it's courage, but courage needs a financial backer. And if nobody's going to finance you to take out that cell phone and make a movie and have the courage to tell the truth doesn't get heard. And that's one of the things I know, Marc's direct team wasn't involved, but when Charlottesville really blew up and the narrative shifted, it was because of, Vice News, with the powerful backing of HBO, telling the truth about what really happened there. And if you think about when CNN broke in and started saying tonight on HBO, here's the clips from Vice, that wasn't NBC following those guys. That wasn't Axios or anybody else. It was Vice.
And she's tiny, by the way. She's a tiny, sweet young lady who has no business hanging out with white supremacists.
You're talking about the reporter who went.
Yeah.
Who went
Oh
down
no!
to
I mean,
Charlottesville,
the
right?
building. I will say.
I'm going to go on the record and say nobody should be hanging out with
yes,
white supremacists.
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yes, I was within the subset, but yes.
But I wonder if
But
this
there's
is
good and bad on both sides.
I wonder if that's really one of the critical points here is that in order to combat alternative facts and misinformation and fake news as communicators across all different industries, and I think you sort of touched on this, Ken, is that we need to be working together a little bit more, and we need to be reaching out to each other more, and we need to be supporting each other a little bit more. As communicators, as a PR firm, needs to support and financially support seekers of truth and ones who are going to speak truth to power. And you were describing this a bit before, but can you describe sort of how your firm and some other firms are looking into ways that they can actually sort of support the truth in this era?
Yeah, so I'm not sure everybody's familiar with an organization called the Arthur Page Society, but that's sort of more on the corporate communication side of CCOs. And last spring, they wrote a treatise that I think the PRSA was shown and supported. And it was speaking out against fake news and calling on all communicators to have a full-throated support of journalism. And that meant speaking up to say the media really does matter. And the challenge for big agencies is, well, yeah, but I can put that story on Instagram and control the message. Or wouldn't a Snapchat be better than calling the consumer reporter at Newsweek? Because I can get it out now and I can put paid behind it, and suddenly I have 1 million impressions and my budget's met. And that's all valuable. But when that takes the place of engagement with the media, truth begins to die. So I've yet to see it, any real fundamental shift begin to happen. But there is now an awareness that's happening in the industry that there needs to be the symbiotic relationship that used to exist between journalist and PR person is getting stronger again and needs to.
And another thing that I was thinking of a lot before this panel was how this term was actually created. And so it was 2 days after the inauguration, and Kellyanne Conway is she's on a network with Chuck Todd, and she's defending then Press Secretary Sean Spicer, if you remember that guy. And he said that it was the largest inaugural crowd in history. And so Chuck Todd was showing pictures and saying this is categorically false. How can you possibly defend this? And she said, well, Trump said that it was the biggest crowd size in history, and then Sean presented alternative facts. And so what I found interesting looking back at that I didn't previously really look at was that Chuck Todd immediately interrupted and said, no, like alternative facts are not facts, they're just falsehoods. And so as a reporter, I know one of my biggest responsibilities is to always try to find the truth in a story, to always report the truth. But I wonder, as communicators, do you guys think that it's all a part of our job now to really highlight the truth and really, in a way that we haven't done previously, is really just call out the bullshit?
I'll start first and say it always has been. But I'm not sure if that's always top of mind for every professional. And again, Arthur Page has 7-page principles. The first one is tell the truth. And I think if you went to the average PR person and said, what's the number one principle that you need to abide by to do your job the right way, tell the truth is probably not the first one that comes to mind. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It may be engage with consumers, move product, get closer to marketing. But tell the truth needs to be at the core. It's not always that way.
I think that strategic comms can, again, mattress sales. But I look at it a lot like being a great magician. I want you to look at this hand, not this hand, right? But if you see that I've got a coin in my hand, I'm not going to look you in the eye and say, that's not a coin. You didn't see it. You see I have a coin, but I want you to look at a different way. That, to me, is what a smart, savvy PR person does to flex. Let's change attention. If we have a bad story happening here, let's launch a product over here. To look somebody in the eye and to deny fact is patently wrong. And I am extremely hopeful that there will be a sea change soon where society finds that wholly unacceptable.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that you simply can't lie. You can't. First of all, you'll get caught. That's a guarantee. Like, there are very few lies last very long, especially now. I think that ultimately, the job comes down to presenting the truth in the best possible light for your client, your product, your company, your whoever. And it's the example I often use whenever I talk to people about the job. It's like, it's amazing every week that it seems every television network is number one. I don't know how they do that, but they do. And honestly, it's literally just splitting hairs with demos and this, and all of it is factual. It's not necessarily pure truth, but it is, if you look at the measurement, then it is true. But again, that's the difference between spin and lying, because it is verifiable fact, whether it's impactful, whether it is, the best, like the best answer, like you would on the SATs, that's debatable. But I do think you still have a grain of truth in there that's undeniable. Spin is a whole different animal, but I think that it's just, when you start actually looking at the truth square in the face and just saying, no, that's not true, you're in a funhouse mirror.
It's like we went from spin doctors to like truth morticians.
Exactly. Like, you have to call time of death. You got to do all the weird gooey stuff.
November 2016.
Yes, as I was there.
For me, working with alternative facts and fake news, it's been something that I've been researching. What is the best possible way for me to avoid, purporting falsities, even if I'm trying to debunk something that is false? What extra steps can I be taking to make sure that I'm no longer just spreading this lie that someone else wants me to spread? And so I actually was looking at some research. This was on Samantha Bee, if you watch. Last week, she had her incredible reporter go to Finland, which has really combated fake news. They're from the government level, from the top down. And their president would sort of speak out every time that there were stories on the web and in the news that were false. And they took this proactive measure to just really shut down alternative facts and fake news. And so in looking at how they took this down, they actually had an American researcher who went to Finland who told them that out of his research, he found that by repeating a lie, you actually help that lie spread, even if you're debunking it or creating it or noting that it's false. So, when Donald Trump came out and said that it was the largest crowd size in history and his White House backed that up, perhaps our headlines should have not said, Trump says he has the largest crowd sizes in history. Perhaps the headline should have read, Barack Obama had the largest inaugural crowd size in history, or just Donald Trump is lying. And so, that's sort of something that I'm taking on now to combat alternative facts. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you guys are doing in your industries to just battle alternative facts, whether it's reviews or whether it's misinformation.
Well, as an agency, something we have to do every day, and the phrase we use is listen loudly, which means we're always monitoring what's being said about our clients and correcting as we can. But part of the problem is the rapidity of media today, and the desire to be first. Whoever's first wins. Whoever's story gets the most shares or likes gets to keep their job. So the notion, I think Mark mentioned the fact-checking earlier. Fortune magazine used to have dozens of people who did fact-checking. The New Yorker was famed for having the best fact-checking department in media. They're all out of a job because there's nobody to pay for those people anymore. So if you were to break a story right away and it was factually incorrect because of a bad source, whose fault is that? Yours or the pressure of the changing landscape of media that's causing you to move so fast that errors get made? And that's part of this new dynamic that's causing the problem.
I think it comes back to quality over quantity. There's this mad race for every publisher to create as much content as possible, and then you end up having 50 articles about the exact same thing. And I actually don't know if it's always who's first to publish, it's who's first to have the splashiest headline. And in a headline, newsfeed-driven society, that splash will always win out against what could potentially be a better reported piece. So I think it's more about not only education, which looks like it worked in Finland, and that was a phenomenal segment, but it's also about really treating our finest media outlets and putting them on a platform above the mess of the platform that is Facebook. I think Facebook itself and Google both need to figure out a way to really separate journalists from writers.
I think for us, at VICELAND, with the programming that we have, some of it is straight nonfiction, and we just kind of let it speak for itself. We've got, comedy programming as well that we sort of, we spend a lot of time highlighting that because, again, our late night show, Jesus and Mero, spends a lot of time, calling out the nonsense that's in the news every night. So I think you do what you can where you can, as far as like fighting it. But I was curious actually to ask you a question about the Page Foundation. Like, is there a similar body that has sway over the advertising community? Because that seems to me like they're the ones that advertise in the Newsweeks and in the newspapers. Like, if they're going to put all their money, obviously, in the Googles and Facebooks because of return, like, is there any sort of governing body or like trust that oversees them in any way?
Yeah, well, there's the 4 A's, but I haven't seen anybody speak out about ad agencies redirecting revenue and as part of aid. But that would be an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, because it just seems like if there is, there is clearly a line, right, of sources that we collectively have decided to trust and have not let us down, right? So we rely on the New York Times, the Washington Post, all these other blue chip press outlets, and it just seems to me like there is this premium now, and it almost feels like there needs to be more of a movement to what you were describing.
Yeah.
So I think, by the way, I think that's a fascinating thing that they're doing, and I think the more of that, the better, because I think it's a conversation nobody wants to have out loud because it's funny to make fun of it. It's just because it's so preposterous, but it has a lingering, deteriorating effect on all of us because also the culture is such that we are all living in our own subjective reality. Yep. When you go on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, everybody's having the best life ever. Right? Like, nobody posts like bad days. So that is like the underlying sort of engine. And then at this top level of information that is vitally important, potentially cataclysmically horrible, or all these things, and to not have the same level of quality control on that I do on the picture of the pancakes I had for breakfast is insane. And there really isn't any difference in terms of, editorial control.
It's sad to see the news sandwiched between pictures of apple picking.
Absolutely. And but that's exactly what it is.
I think on social media platforms, there's probably two things, two entities that you don't want watching your social media content. One's your mother, and two is the government. And hopefully many of you read this morning's New York Times and the really thoughtful piece they did on China and internet regulation in China, and how the Chinese government's now standing up and pointing the finger at the U.S., saying, "Ha-ha, we don't have fake news problems in China." We'll see. It's the news that they choose to publish, but they don't allow for lying because they'll come and get you. And the Times had some really high-level U.S. people beginning to look at what China did, similar to Finland, to say somebody's got to crack down on this. And the notion of Facebook or Google not being media companies, well, that's a fine line because a media company can claim First Amendment. If they're a technology platform, they can't hide behind the First Amendment and be spreading falsehoods and lies that are damaging corporate reputation, share price, elections. And that's convoluted. There's no clear U.S. law about corporate personhood. But this is a huge dynamic, and I think we might see government step in, especially under a Trump regime, and start regulating the internet for content, not just privacy.
Those threats are already there, and not just with the internet, with news networks as well. He tweeted, I think last week, that he would like to start reviewing network licenses. But I wonder, with these enormous platforms like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, all three of which were used to impact the election by a foreign adversary, whether it starts with sort of the gatekeeper communicators in those companies and in the PR world and in media to start speaking out against following the money where all of this money is going towards those platforms instead of the classics or sort of the companies that used to receive such funds. I wonder if it starts with us or whether it starts with our consumers who start seeing the backlash to everything that happened in this election, for example, and start saying, no, we're gonna stand up against this. We're gonna stand up against Facebook being used. I'm wondering just if you have any thoughts on does it take the consumer backlash for Sheryl Sandbergs of the world to stand up and say, we're gonna start putting our resources into making sure that this no longer happens, or will it have to take a cataclysmic shift like the government stepping in Trump's America?
Well, I hope it's not going to be the government, but I think what we're seeing started with an existential crisis. And people embrace social media because it was a comfort food. And to your point earlier, you want to agree with people who agreed with what you thought because that makes you feel special and smarter. And that becomes news to you. And then as newspapers went away and people didn't subscribe to papers or magazines and it became expensive to go get it, news got fed to you. Thank God for things like Vice and Comedy Central that actually comedians were giving you more news than people were reading. It became the problem, but I think existential crisis in America, leads to change and revolt, and sometimes it takes a generation. And I think Gen Z, maybe what comes out of the woodwork and starts to question and look for truth and put pressure on corporations. And no offense, Newsweek, but I brought a copy of Time from last April with me, and in the '60s. Maybe some people here are old enough to remember this. Time magazine did a very famous cover during the Vietnam War called "Is God Dead?" And they questioned the belief in God in America, and that was part of this, post-Vietnam crisis of belief. And they never really revisited that topic. It's considered sacred at the magazine as a cover until last April, and when they published "Is Truth Dead?" And just from the reaction, I can tell nobody subscribes to Time magazine because I may have the only copy in New York. And that's part of the problem. And that cover came from an interview with the president. And that led them to say the truth doesn't matter anymore. But what they're talking about is not, are people lying, are people making a profit out of fake news? America's in a crisis where the arbiter of the truth, people that we could always go to like mom and dad to say, Bobby said something in the playground, was it true? And mom and dad, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Newsweek, Time magazine, would tell us the truth and say, well, no, Bobby, that's not how the world works. Mom and dad are gone because they're behind this weird paywall, and we're not looking for them
At least
anymore.
we get 2 Christmases.
Exactly.
No, it's crazy. It's really a crazy thing to think about, and it's all happened so fast. The speed at which, these sort of paywall, driven economy for news, the speed that had to happen just to keep afloat is mind-boggling, combined with this willingness to just embrace subjective reality as reality and as truth itself. Because it's just, I think that's the other thing that I think. If you see the government start to take steps into controlling things, no one in America likes to hear about government control of anything. So maybe that is the sort of the big push that no, get your hands off my internet.
But it's also
But I don't
less
know how
about-
active they get,
But to me, it's less about control and it's more about disclosures. If you're going to keep lying, you at least need to say where the lie is coming from. Disclose where the money is coming from. Because I guarantee people will read the news, read product reviews differently. When you were looking for your hair product and you knew that somebody got a discount on that hair product, you probably still took the review to heart. But maybe you were a little bit more skeptical. And so I think so long as we have truth fueling our skepticism, which comes in the form of disclosures, we'll be a lot safer on the web.
And I think just sort of to tie it all together, I think it's just fascinating that I'm a reporter, so I'm around people every single day of my life who are stressed out and ripping their hair out about fake news and alternative facts. But it's great to see that people in other industries or in tangential industries are seeing how we can all battle this and really come together to try to work through this time. So
Plus,
with that,
naps really help.
yeah. And so we'll all go home
Casper.com,
after this
you get
and
a
go take a
mattress.
nap on our
So
Casper
comfortable.
mattress. But thank you guys so much for listening. Really appreciate it.
I was gonna